The bus hissed to a stop at the edge of Raven's Hollow, and Evelyn Harper stepped onto the fog-draped cobblestones, shivering despite the cool autumn air. The town seemed frozen in time. Gas lamps flickered weakly through the mist, casting long, wavering shadows that danced along narrow alleyways. Buildings leaned at odd angles, their wooden shutters hanging loose, giving the impression that the town itself was holding its breath. Evelyn hoisted her leather satchel and adjusted her coat. She had come to investigate the mysterious disappearances that had plagued the town for decades. Her instincts told her something was off the moment she arrived. The few townsfolk she passed on the main street were pale and silent. One elderly man gave her a smile that didn't reach his eyes, while a young woman hurried past, clutching a basket as if afraid of being noticed. There were whispers, soft, almost imperceptible, that seemed to drift from the walls themselves, vanishing whenever she tried to focus on them. Her inn was an old brick building with a crooked sign swinging in the wind. Inside, the air smelled faintly of mildew and wood smoke. Evelyn set down her bag and glanced at the dusty mirror in the hallway. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw a shadow behind her, darker than the night outside. When she spun around, nothing was there. Her pulse raced, but an almost magnetic pull compelled her to continue. Each step forward felt heavier, as if the cobblestones resisted her passage. By the time she returned to the inn, the unease had settled deep in her bones. Raven's Hollow wasn't just a town with a dark past. It was a town alive with secrets, and the streets themselves were whispering, promising that her investigation had only just begun. The morning fog clung stubbornly to Raven's Hollow, refusing to lift as Evelyn made her way to the town library. Its heavy wooden doors groaned when she pushed them open, revealing shelves stacked with dusty tomes and yellowed newspapers. She ran her fingers along the spines, the musty scent filling her lungs, and found the section devoted to local history. Old articles chronicled the disappearances, names, dates, and photographs of people who had vanished after nightfall. Each case followed the same eerie pattern. No struggle, no signs of forced entry, just sudden absence. Eyewitness accounts hinted at strange figures and moving shadows, but the locals dismissed them as folklore. Evelyn's heart pounded as she realized that the disappearances spanned decades, occurring in nearly every generation. Something sinister lingered in the streets themselves. That evening, she returned to the cobblestone lanes with a notebook and flashlight, determined to record anything unusual. The shadows were worse now, stretching unnaturally long and bending around corners as if they had lives of their own. Evelyn caught glimpses of figures dressed in old-fashioned clothing, men in tailcoats, women in Victorian gowns, standing silently in doorways, watching her every move. When she blinked, they vanished. Some townspeople tried to warn her. An elderly woman whispered from her porch, "The streets, they don't forget, they never let go." A young man hurried past her, muttering, "Go back, go while you still can." Yet others seemed intent on luring her deeper, pointing her toward twisting alleys and abandoned buildings. Evelyn realized with a shiver that the town itself was complicit, playing a deadly game with any outsider who wandered too far. As the night deepened, she found herself in a narrow alley that seemed unfamiliar despite having walked these streets before. The cobblestones underfoot shifted subtly, forming paths she hadn't noticed earlier. A cold wind swirled, carrying whispers, soft, urgent, and almost pleading. "Evelyn, come, stay." The name hit her ears like ice. Her flashlight flickered, and the shadows at the edges of her vision stretched closer, crawling along the walls like living things. Panic rose, but she fought it back, forcing her legs to move. One misstep, one hesitation, and she nearly tripped over a loose stone, but when she glanced down, there was nothing there. The streets themselves seemed alive, reshaping around her, testing her courage. Every turn brought another fleeting glimpse of those spectral figures, always just out of reach, always watching. Finally, gasping for breath, she stumbled into the square where a single fountain gurgled weakly in the fog. The shadows receded and the whispers faded, leaving an eerie silence. But the unease lingered, gnawing at her mind. Raven's Hollow wasn't just haunted by its past, it was actively defending its secrets, and Evelyn knew that tonight had shown only a fraction of the darkness waiting in the streets. The town's heartbeat was slow, deliberate, and it had noticed her. The game was beginning, and the streets would not let her go easily. By the third night, Evelyn's exhaustion was nearly unbearable, yet she could not stop. Raven's Hollow had a pull, a magnetic insistence that kept her walking the cobblestones, searching for the truth. She returned to the alleys, flashlight trembling in her hand, following a series of clues she had pieced together from the library archives and whispered warnings. Her path led her to the old chapel at the edge of town. Its doors were splintered and covered in moss, and the windows were so grimy that moonlight barely penetrated. Pushing them open, she stepped inside. Dust and decay filled the air, mixing with the faint metallic tang of old rituals. The pews were scratched and scarred, and on the altar lay faded parchments covered in cryptic symbols. Evelyn's breath caught when she saw portraits lining the walls, faces of people who had vanished decades ago, their eyes seeming to follow her every move. A low whispering began, barely audible at first, growing steadily louder until it became a chorus. "You shouldn't be here. The streets take what is theirs." Shadows gathered at the edges of the chapel, stretching across the floor like dark liquid. Evelyn felt the walls shift, narrowing, trapping her. The chapel was no longer a building. It was part of the town's living, breathing malevolence. Stepping outside should have brought relief, but the streets had transformed. The familiar alleys twisted endlessly, looping back on themselves. She realized with growing terror that the town itself had become a labyrinth. Figures in antique clothing lurked at every corner, emerging from walls and doorways to whisper her name. One man, seemingly kind in daylight, now revealed himself as a twisted, shadow-wrapped figure, attempting to pull her into an alley that had stretched impossibly far. Evelyn ran, the fog thickening around her, swallowing her screams. The cobblestones beneath her feet seemed to shift, subtly resisting each step. Time itself warped. Hours might have passed in minutes, and yet she felt every second stretch like an eternity. She glimpsed the fountain in the square ahead, its water blackened and still, a beacon of false safety. She realized the horrific truth. Raven's Hollow demanded a sacrifice, a soul to feed the street's insatiable hunger. The shadows weren't just illusions, they were extensions of the town, hunting, testing, and marking her. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she fought panic, knowing that hesitation would cost her life. Desperation drove her deeper into the labyrinthine streets, following fragments of the ritual instructions she had memorized from the chapel. Candles flickered along alleyways where no one had placed them, and the whispers grew frantic, almost pleading. Evelyn's hands shook as she clutched the ceremonial object she had retrieved, an artifact meant to protect her, to give her a chance to fight back. Every corner she turned, every shadow she faced seemed determined to swallow her whole. But Evelyn's resolve hardened. She would not become another name in the town's cursed archives. She would face the darkness, even if it meant confronting the streets themselves. Tonight, the boundary between reality and nightmare had disappeared, and only one question remained. Could she survive Raven's Hollow, or would the town finally claim her? The night hung heavy over Raven's Hollow, thicker than fog, darker than shadow. Evelyn Harper's lungs burned with every step as she raced through streets that seemed alive, twisting and stretching to trap her. She clutched the ceremonial object, a small, ancient talisman she had retrieved from the chapel, its weight a reminder of the ritual that might save her. She reached the town square, where the old fountain gurgled weakly, surrounded by crooked buildings that leaned closer, as if peering down to watch her. The shadows surged around her, whispering, hissing her name in voices that were not human. They reached for her, twisting the edges of her vision, warping reality. The streets themselves seemed to pulse, cobblestones heaving like a heartbeat beneath her feet. Evelyn forced herself to kneel at the center of the square, placing the talisman on the cracked stone. She began the ritual, chanting the words she had memorized from the chapel's ancient scrolls. The shadows shrieked and lunged, attempting to stop her. Figures emerged from the fog, their eyes hollow, their mouths stretched into silent screams. One tried to grab her arm, its touch cold and unreal, yet terrifyingly solid. "Hold on, you can't take me," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling but resolute. She traced the final symbols into the stone, feeling the talisman's power pulse through her fingers, burning warmth into her palms. The shadows recoiled, writhing, hissing, as if the streets themselves had been wounded. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. Silence fell, broken only by the distant toll of the old clock tower striking midnight. A light, faint but steady, glimmered from the talisman, casting the fog aside and revealing the square in its entirety. The twisted alleyways, the lurking figures, even the warped buildings seemed to shrink back, retreating into themselves. The streets no longer threatened her. Breathless, Evelyn stood, clutching the talisman tightly. The town appeared calm, normal almost, bathed in pale moonlight, yet she knew the victory was incomplete. One shadow lingered, a dark silhouette at the edge of the square, watching her with endless patience. It did not move, but its presence pressed upon her, a silent reminder that Raven's Hollow had not forgotten. The streets had spared her, this time. As dawn approached, the fog began to lift, curling away from the cobblestones. Evelyn made her way to the edge of town, each step taking her closer to freedom. The streets no longer shifted beneath her feet, and the whispers faded into the wind. She dared a glance back. Raven's Hollow looked like any sleepy town waking to morning light, its secrets hidden once more beneath a veneer of normalcy. But Evelyn knew better. Somewhere in the twisting alleys, in the silent corners, the town waited. Its hunger was patient, eternal, and though she had survived the night, the streets would never release her memory, never forgive her intrusion. Raven's Hollow held its secrets close, and one day it would claim another curious soul who dared walk its haunted streets after nightfall. Evelyn Harper disappeared into the horizon, carrying the story that would haunt her forever, leaving Raven's Hollow to sleep, waiting and whispering in the darkness.